Hello, welcome to the Rippling Pages with me, Liam Bishop, curating the best writers to inspire you and your writing. Now, I'm here with another edition of Rippling Points. That's a little bit more insight and a little bit more inspiration into the craft of writing with some extra bonus content from the previous episode. And that was with Vincenzo Latronico, and he was here to talk to me about his novel Perfection that has just been translated into English by Sophie Hughes from the Italian for Fitzcarraldo editions. In this snippet, you're going to hear Vincenzo talking more about how and why he set his novel in Berlin, and he raises the questions about how and why and where locations become, or perhaps don't become, so important for the development of a novel. And then you're going to hear us talk a little bit more about how the global market of translation works. And perhaps we might call it the politics of global translation and global literature in the English-speaking market. Remember to like, share, follow, subscribe, or even just simply tell your friends about the Rippling Pages podcast if you enjoy today's episode, or indeed any other previous episodes of the podcast. My question is then, why did you take it then to Berlin?
Originally, I didn't mean to write that story as set in Berlin, even though I was living there at the time. In my very, very first draft, the first chapter especially was set in Milan. But then a book that I have been thinking about a lot for years and that has really shaped a lot of my thoughts on literature is The Fall of Language in the Age of English by Mitsumura Minae, a Japanese writer who is now, I think, in her 80s. And a conversation between traditions, between corpora of works that were on the same standing, at least for wealthy, mostly Western, but not only countries. There was Japanese literature, there was German literature, there was English literature, and there was a conversation going on. And what she describes in the book is how over the past few decades, this horizontal process kind of became vertical. And instead of having a collection of national literatures that, yes, has a clearly colonial 19th century heritage, but still is a horizontal conversation between peers, she noted how this had become more and more a kind of vertical arrangement in which there was a literature that aspired to define itself as universal, which is the English-speaking, but mostly North American literature, and other literatures were considered local and were only translated or looked at in so much as they offered some sort of sense of exoticism. For Italy, you could say mafia, the Neapolitan coast, pizzas, Madonnas which cry, the Pope. You can now tell that these are the stories that are coming from Italy, right? These are the stories that most strike the interest of the international public. This thing happened to me when I was living in Germany. My second novel is like a very Balzacian, complicated, plot-driven novel, which is about ambition and finance, and it's set in Milan and Venice. And a German publisher was interested in translating it, so we met when I was living in Berlin, and ultimately he decided against it. And he said, well, I really liked your book, but the German public, for them it would be strange to imagine a story of finance set in Venice. For us, finance happens in Frankfurt or in New York. But he said, the Venice scenes are amazing. Why did you write a book about Venice? And this is the kind of dynamics I'm trying to describe. And so it's as if there are some universally recognized backgrounds for so-called universal value stories. And these can be New York, they can be California, it can be London to a certain extent. But Naples can't be the background of a story about some universal feelings. Naples can be the background of a story about Naples, about the Camorra, about southern Italy. And so I was wondering, what kind of story can someone write from a tradition that is perceived as local, that doesn't have that kind of access to universal backgrounds, but that still is not as confined to those topics and to those settings? And I was like, well, Berlin 2010 was definitely something that was, of course, not universal. I think that even the very notion of universal is now very suspicious. But at least it was not national. Berlin in 2010 was something that was at least pan-European as a phenomenon. Living there, you met people from all over Europe, which at the time luckily still included the UK, and you had the feeling, a fleeting feeling, a feeling that history would later prove wrong, that this process of integration and of communion was only going to become deeper, that there would be a dropping of national barriers within Europe. And I felt, well, okay, this is a story that I can write that at least is not local. It's not confined to some stereotype of my nationality. And this is why I originally decided to write the stories set in Berlin.
I've seen a discernible shift in how we, how we receive translated books and how we receive translators. I think, it wasn't like a done thing that you would have a translator's name on the book, which is crazy, really. But now that still happens, I think, but across the board, you're seeing translators' names on front covers, and that kind of thing. And I think it's something, for me personally, I love translated literature. I absolutely love it. I think you just got an opportunity to learn so much, even though you're not reading the original language. You've just got so much opportunity to learn about different cultures. But I think the independent book movement has probably helped with that quite a lot. Taking chances on books that might not otherwise get chances. Long may it continue. Also. But I think it's also precarious, isn't it? It's it's still a marketplace, isn't it? And I think there's a pressure to get the right book translated.
It's working as a translator, especially. I don't know if this. In Italy, but of course it's because it's about Italy, and we are kind of very narcissistic and think everything is about us. In Italy, we would say that this has started with the Elena Ferrante fever in the US, and how, in the absence of the writer, the translator Anne Goldstein, who also did an incredible job, kind of took the stage in her place, and all of a sudden a much wider public was exposed to the existence of this mythical figure, the translator. And but I have the impression that literary translation as a craft and as an art is taken more and more seriously. Being published in English is a big milestone for any non-English speaking writer, and so in many ways. This is something I've aspired to since I started, and it does really feel like the beginning of a new phase in my path as a writer. It's something that means a lot.